Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, welcome. I am so delighted to introduce you to my guest today, David Kolb. David is a teacher and coach. He has reached thousands of executives with his articulate and passionate approach. He uses his training in psychology and his experiences in business to prepare leaders for the complexity of their 21st century roles. David's energy and easily understood writing style come from decades of combining his varied life experiences with his training in psychology and applies all that to the environment, culture, and inner processes of emerging and veteran leaders. He has been an executive coach, educator, and leader himself. He began his working career as a builder and general contractor. And as he often says about his professional work, I'm doing the same work. I simply change the raw materials with which I work. So his leadership guidance comes from practical and proven applications. David is also the author of, ironically, Leading from the Inside Out. Welcome, David.
Hi, Tammy. Hi, Tammy.
Yeah, I got such a kick out of that when I saw your book.
Yeah, when I got your email and our mutual friend introduced us, I was like, no, wait a moment. Who got here first? And then it's like, it doesn't matter who got here first.
It doesn't matter because we both have some very similar things to say and some very different things to say, and that's just fine.
Yes.
There's plenty to go around, but it was really funny. It was like, well, here we are in Work from the Inside Out, and I'm going to interview the author of Lead from the Inside Out. But so anyway, I want to hear about your book. I've read parts of it and loved everything I've seen so far. But tell us about your earlier days. And since this is a podcast about transitions and the kinds of decisions that people make along the way to find greater fulfillment and meaning, tell us about your background a little bit.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Tammy, for inviting me on your pod and giving me the opportunity to talk about what I'm doing now and the book that I've just published. Yeah, my background, wow, and this notion of transitions. Well, it kind of feels to me like my whole life has been a transition. And if we see that as like a large cycle called transition, then there are these epicycles within that where it's transition after transition. And I think one of the things that I want to say sort of in big picture here, first of all, is earlier in my career and in my adult life, transitions were a bit daunting. And some I would look forward to, but the process of transitioning often required some kind of stretching or pain or sloughing off of something that I treasured.
Yeah.
So it's taken quite a few years and quite a few transitions to realize that there's often something very wonderful in the outcome of a transition, though it might not feel that way at the front end.
Right. Well, it sounds like also what you're pointing to, which many of my guests have talked about, is that transition, it's not a linear process.
Right.
It is. There's transitions within the transitions. And, even though I think many transitions we're aiming for something perhaps more positive, sometimes transitions come to us not necessarily in ways that are positive. Some, there are all kinds of life events, right?
Or even coming at our own wish or timing.
Right.
We can often be on the tail end of someone else's transition, and that causes us to have to make some changes ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. So some are by choice and some maybe feel put upon us in some ways. But so you started in construction, is that right?
Yes, yes. I grew up in a very modest home and with pretty humble beginnings, certainly academically, and no expectations at all of higher education. And what I did realize was that I was pretty good at putting things together and taking them apart, working with my hands. And so I looked at becoming a tradesperson. And carpentry was in my sights. It's what I was good at. It's what I enjoyed, and that led me into becoming a building contractor.
Mm.
So that was really my first career,
Mm-hmm.
and I carried on that career as my livelihood well into my late 30s, and around age 40 is when I had, I would say, my largest career, lifestyle, relationship transitions all rolled into one big kind of explosion and breakdown.
Wow. Wow. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, yes, I think part of what was happening there for me was that my spirit was awakening in my late 30s. And by that, I mean, I grew up in a very religious home. I had a real sense of deep faith early in my adulthood. And then I had some challenges to that, some shaking of my faith. And I was pretty much finished with religion, with all of that stuff that smacked of God
Yeah.
or whatever the divine was.
Yeah.
And I began in my late 30s to begin reading and also get introduced to the whole notion of the spiritual life rather than a religious life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I even got excited by some of those things about past lives and what led then into the 90s of sort of the New Age movement that I tagged along with a bit.
Yeah.
But that awakened in me this notion that there was more than the here and now. And I didn't even mean just, let's say, heaven or hell or whatever the images of afterlife are,
Right.
but that even in our existence and my existence in the now, there were dimensions to the now that were unseen
Mm.
and that were could not be touched, but I certainly could sense them.
Yeah.
And so that was one ingredient that was going on. Another was I was on a ocean sailing delivery with two other men, and I experienced during that trip I experienced a near death
Oh.
experience, and I was gone for, I'm guessing it was somewhere around 12 clock hours that I cannot account for in anything of the retelling of the story or playing that back with the other men. And during that time, I believe, and my
Yeah.
experience supported that I was on the other side, whatever
Okay.
that was.
Mm-hmm.
But it was wonderful.
Yeah.
There was nothing fearful about it. In fact, it was delightful. And when I returned from that trip, I know that my wife looked at me in a way that I must have appeared like I came back from some place other than just a sailing trip.
Uh-huh.
So those two experiences awakened in me, why am I here? Where do I want to go? What's my life all about?
Yeah. Those are big
And
questions.
very big questions. Yeah. And that then led to questioning my marriage, my career direction. And over the course of 5, 6 years, a very long transition,
Yeah.
I transitioned out of my career, transitioned out of my marriage. My wife and I got a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to graduate school to become a psychotherapist, got my
Mm-hmm.
degree in clinical psychology. And you said earlier in the introduction about the similarity that I often speak to about contracting or carpentry or building and psychology.
Yeah.
And really, what I've noticed in working with my clients now and how it relates to building is so many people that I encounter are trying to put a new coat of paint on something,
Yeah.
or they want to remodel their metaphorical kitchen in their own
Mm-hmm.
life. It's like, well, could I just tweak this a little bit?
Yeah.
And it's so doing and getting into some of that, they discover that the paint won't stick.
Right.
There's moisture behind the walls. There may be some rot in the crawl space. There may be some asbestos in some previous products they put in. that's all the building story.
Right.
But from a personal story, it's the expectations that one holds, or I'll come back to my own life that I held, that something should be a certain way, that
Yeah.
relationships should look a certain way, that I should reach a certain level of success, a certain
Right.
level of income. So I needed to dismantle my expectations. And that's one of the things I often find with my clients that I work with is if they can identify their expectations, they're able then often to question them, challenge them,
Yep.
and see
Yep.
what's got to come up next.
Yeah. And, I love what you're talking about. First of all, I love the metaphor of renovating one's kitchen because I'm always having those fantasies. But I love the idea. I think it's a very accessible metaphor, like putting a new coat of paint on a wall and not really realizing what might be going on behind that new coat of paint. And the whole notion of expectations and how we carry around all these expectations. And if we're not really explicit in our own minds about what are we really expecting versus what really happens, I think many of us have entered into careers or made transitions into new careers with a set of expectations, not really knowing what's behind that fresh coat of paint. And it's not that we're always going to know ahead of time, but I do think by having that clarity about what we're expecting or by setting an intention of some type, we know that we can then adjust or adapt or figure out, are we really where we want to be? Were those original expectations, being met, or did we find something new behind that coat of paint? And is that okay even?
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Well, that notion of to just string that metaphor out just a little bit further, unless you're going to prepare to put paint on a wall, you don't often realize the condition of the wall.
Yeah. Right.
So there is this. I'm always fascinated about what brings people to the brink of a transition or to the question in their life. So what are those circumstances about? And I think as I look at my own life and as I play back many of my clients' predicaments that they would come to, I think one of the things, and I talk about this in my book, Tammy, is that what generates a transition is a challenge to our identity. And so let me unpack that for a moment.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Whenever we hear the word I, the pronoun I, whatever follows that is an identification, at least in that moment, in that part of the conversation. So if I were to say, and I just used the word I there, so now that identification for me is getting into a teaching mode right now. So I'm calling on the part of me that is a teacher, that is an instructor. And I'm needing to put some of the other parts of me temporarily aside. Now, if any of those other parts want to come roaring in and grab the microphone, like I'm thirsty, and so I grab my glass of water and I take a drink, or I'm tired, I don't really have the energy for this conversation, Tammy, or whatever the other I fill in the blank is.
Right.
That's what we often experience, I think, in our transitions. We are at an intersection of our parts, of our identities.
Right.
And so I'm always looking at who is it that is having the experience or what part is having that experience.
Right.
So as I said a moment ago, I'm getting into my teaching part here. And so that's I think this, or I believe that, or I've discovered this. And so I'm expounding on something. Yeah. And that's when you might see me as being in my teacher part or role.
Right. Well, I remember when we talked prior to this interview, you talked about, that each of us has many parts, and it's like being the maestro and then the orchestra, right? And
Yes.
so the maestro is kind of conducting all the parts. And so if you can almost think of yourself as the maestro, but then noticing that entire orchestra is also yourself, noticing what all those parts are, it gives you a framework, I think, in which to think about what's going on in your life, what parts are working, what parts maybe are not working for you, and what is it that you're really trying to change or transition. It's interesting too, because I think part of the way we're framing this is in the context of somebody who's really unhappy in some way.
Mhm.
And one of the surprises that I've gotten through many of the conversations I've had in this podcast is how many people who've made significant transitions did it from a place of actually being pretty happy and satisfied.
Mm.
So I was surprised by that, but I'm now sort of reorienting my parts and my
Mm.
framework in
Mhm.
terms of thinking about transitions, and that sometimes people don't make a change just from a place of, let's say, a place of being in pain or discomfort or lack of fulfillment, but they actually, in fact, I just had a conversation with somebody the other day about this, where she was saying, everything in my life is going really well, but I'm just ready for something new.
Mm. Yeah.
You know?
So if I were working, can I pick up on that
Yeah,
example for a moment,
absolutely.
Tammy? Because if I were working with a person like that, then I typically can hear and see a shift in their body language,
Yeah,
in their facial expression, and their tone
yeah,
of the voice when the person will go to saying something like, "But I'm just ready for some change,"
yeah.
and it's like as though someone else is speaking. And
Mhm.
in that moment, I deliberately try to engage that part in a conversation.
I see.
So, I might say, so who was that just
Yeah,
spoke there?
yeah,
What part of you is that? Let's Let me talk to her a little bit more, or let's
yeah.
discover what he really is coming from. And that person then my client person can then often give voice to the part of them
Mm.
that has been perhaps in the background
Yes.
behind
Yeah.
a lot of success and happiness.
Yes. So there's something there that's that's wanting to be fulfilled.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
At the same time, I think for most of us humans, we are not apt to walk into a change deliberately
Mm.
unless there's some element of pain or trauma.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. Yeah.
So there's a health scare or a diagnosis
Yeah.
or a relationship breakdown or a job loss
Yeah.
or one of the or your kid just leaves home and walks out and slams the door. Some disruption
Yeah.
to life. And that's usually what gives us the opportunity, one we don't seek, but it's thrown at us to really examine who are we.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the executives that I work with and that I write about in my book often come to those moments, to those crossroads, because of, let's say, a board of directors has challenged the CEO on a
Yeah.
direction he or she is taking the company, or a senior leader in the company has confronted my client and said, why this, why that? I expect this. So there's some challenge that comes to them. And so I'm brought in to help them navigate that rough patch.
Right. Right.
And many times that is what's called for there is for them to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
And that's about their identity. So who are you really?
Right. And that changes over time too, though, doesn't it? I mean,
Oh, it's
it,
incredibly
yeah.
dynamic.
You think about, if I think about the changes I've made over the years, the person I was when I graduated from college is a very different person than I am now. And yet I still have some of the same things that I'm passionate about, but I would be expressing them differently now.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So it's interesting to think about those people who are in pain, who get themselves into that place of stuck, let's say, those people who don't get called in or who don't call you or I.
Where they're just sort of stuck in their misery.
They're stuck, or they're stuck in this almost safe space of misery.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, and I see a lot of this, I'm sure you do too, where just people that we even know personally, casually, who have been in a certain role, whether it's, you know, I mean, most of what we're talking about here is about work, but, you know, we see it in people's personal lives too, right?
Sure.
I think work is personal anyway, because I love what I do so much. So I don't separate them that much. But I think about people who, you know, are in a job or in a profession that they've gotten comfortable in. But when you look behind that fresh coat of paint, they're not that happy. And, you know, those are the people that I'm hoping might listen to this and say, hey, maybe it's time to take a look and figure out what else I can do to find my way, to develop. You know, I think part of it does, you know, involve taking a look in the mirror. You know, there are a number of things that, and I think your book, you know, even though your book is about leadership, in my mind, in order to make a good transition, you have to really exhibit a lot of good leadership tools and skills to get yourself to a place that puts you, you know, in a place where you're feeling a whole lot better with yourself and with life. Right?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And I've had some readers comment back to me that that same idea you just had there, Tammy, around it. Clearly, the text in my book is targeting leaders and executives, people in business. But I've had parents talk to me about, as a parent, it has really helped them to figure out who they are and how they want to be leading the development of their child. And that their own child's development has brought an opportunity for development back to the parent.
Yeah, I think, and to be able to even recognize some of these pathways and traits even within their children.
Yes.
You know, I'm actually, as we're talking, I'm looking at a diagram in your book that talks about insight, the capacity for connection.
Yeah.
And you talk about affinity, diplomacy, possibility, development, self-awareness. All those words just sort of jumped off the page at me in terms of thinking about the kinds of things that I think people need to either be aware of or access within themselves in a way to make a transition that's really going to land well for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. Yeah. I want to go back for a moment though to something you said, and we buzzed right over it.
Okay.
The notion of sort of those static places that we find ourselves in life and the safety that we experience in those moments.
Yeah.
And I think we often are in those times, and I'm now thinking of myself and my own life, as well as my clients, people I talk with. It's often, I think, because it meets some really core need. And that's often connected, of course, to identity. So our needs and our identities are inseparable. But the notion of, I'm thinking of one of my clients, for example, who was a VP of national sales for a global apparel company. And he was doing pretty well. Financially, he was doing fantastic. And he was doing pretty well in his career. But the HR person called me and said, you need to have a chat with so-and-so. And I want to refer you to him for executive coaching. And so this individual, and without going into all of the steps in that process, this individual and I began to work. And what I discovered is he was really, really frustrated inside. And he was frustrated, I think, and the way our work unfolded was because he wasn't happy.
Yeah.
He was making good money, but all of a sudden that didn't buy happiness.
Nope.
He had this lovely 6,000 square foot home and he wasn't happy.
Yeah.
And it got to be really funny because as we looked at where he found his happiness, it was making things to entertain his kids. And the upshot of it was to fast forward, he left that company. He gave his notice, and he started a small company building games for kids. Now, that was more hobby, but at least it was an exit ramp for him to get out of that safety net that he was experiencing, take a risk financially, get his spirit lifted, get a smile on his face, and do something that was fun for him. And he now is still, as I look, and I haven't been in touch with him for a number of years, but as I look in his LinkedIn profile, he has a long list of very high level sales and marketing positions in large organizations.
Yeah.
So he hasn't changed his career fundamentally, but he's changed who he was.
Yes.
And
yes.
I believe he found some happiness and some shifting through that transition that he needed to shake loose from the security of the job he had and the title and swim in deep water for a bit. And he came back to doing the same kind of work: sales, marketing, leading global teams.
Wow. That's really interesting. I love that story because it does shine a light on another way that somebody might make some of these shifts or transitions that isn't something that someone necessarily might come to on their own. You know, I was listening and I was thinking, gee, I can just imagine that there are some listeners out there thinking, well, that's all great. This guy with a 6,000 square foot home, and he's probably got some good resources in the bank. And sure, he can afford to leave his job and start making toys, right? But there are countless stories of people who don't have those kinds of resources, who also make those kinds of choices, and they find their way. They find their way. And I also think that the idea of taking that kind of a risk has nothing to do with what you have in the bank.
Exactly.
Because there are people who have far less in the bank than he did, who would also have made the same choice and would have been just fine.
And, I think there's a disproportionate correlation there oftentimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those that have less to lose as well.
That's true. And I find
everything to gain.
Yeah. And I find that actually those who have less are often the ones who sometimes take the greater risks.
Yes. Well, I talk about this notion of capacity in my book. And what I'm meaning there, and just to transition a little bit to how do we as humans develop the wherewithal to navigate our transitions?
Yeah.
And I think it's in direct proportion to our capacities. So what do we have that's going to help us do that? And some of us are running on pretty thin margins.
Yeah.
So let's face it, there are those of us who don't have, and I'm not talking finances here, I'm talking about our inner resources.
Right.
And in my book, I identify 7 different capacities that I believe are required of a leader. And can I just give what they are here?
Absolutely. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Okay. So the first one, we've already talked about this, is identity, but that's the capacity for self-mastery. Meaning if you can't master or manage yourself, you're not likely going to be able to be a very good leader. And perhaps parent and partner and friend. So, to me, that's universal.
Yeah.
Then in no particular order here, the next one is insight, the capacity for connection. And you mentioned that a while ago, and some of the stages in that capacity. And each capacity has a number of stages of development.
I see. Yeah.
The next capacity is integrity. I believe that's the capacity for transparency.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we don't often think that relates to us. It's always other people when we're reading the news or seeing the TV, the latest whatever comes out of Washington or New York or Boston or San Francisco. It's like, are our leaders really transparent? And we often see a correlation with integrity there. The next one is inspiration. This is our capacity for innovation. This is where creativity and vision and all of those bits that help us see what's possible and making something that has not yet existed before out of our life and perhaps out of our industry. Then the next is intelligence, which is the capacity for perception. It's really, what are the various ways of knowing that we have available to us? And do we have a capacity for that? Or are we pretty much Johnny or Jane one note? We only want things a certain way.
Yeah.
Then the sixth one is initiative. This is the capacity for action. It's the one that we often notice first when we look at leaders. Oh, look, she really gets a lot done. Look at how he does this. And so they are often identified with this force of nature that they are. And yet there are many excellent leaders who are very modest and humble folk. And but what's your capacity for initiative? How to get yourself started.
Right.
And then the last that I've identified here is influence, which is the capacity for replication. I believe the burden of a leader is to make sure that when they leave the job, leave the planet, that they have replaced themselves many times over.
Yes.
And so that they, in fact, are taking whatever they have that is remarkable as a leader and are developing other people, giving other people the opportunities, all of those pieces of their own life, that they're pouring that back into emerging leaders.
Right. I love this. And to, it's like looking at these areas that you just named, if you're to look even behind them, and I was thinking mostly about the one around initiative, it's so easy to get starry-eyed, let's say, when you see somebody who's got that charisma and they get things done, right?
Yeah.
And maybe they exude that integrity and those qualities. But you really have to look behind that too, to see what does it really take to make those things happen? What is it within their character? What is it within just the actual doing of things day to day? So it's both kind of a personality piece, a spirit piece, I'd say, but also, just a hands-on, yes, they get things done, but oftentimes they don't do it alone. They have a team that they've nurtured, developed to get them there. They've put some things in place to make it look so awesome, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so I think the same thing goes for when I talk to some of the people I've talked to on this podcast who've made transitions, like you. Well, he used to build houses and now he's a psychologist and a therapist and a coach. It's like, look, now that we've unpacked that a little bit, we know, first of all, it wasn't done painlessly and it took time. You spent years transitioning from one thing to the other. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to spend, 5 or 6 years getting there, but I do think that this is one of the key points that I'm finding keeps coming up is that, if you think about you're trying to get from point A to point Z, don't forget about the rest of the alphabet. There's a lot of pieces, and it's, again, we go back to the orchestra again, right? There's all the parts.
Exactly.
And so it's a matter of just giving yourself the time, the patience, the understanding, the love to really conduct your own orchestra.
Yeah, I think that's true, and we are really called to become maestros,
Yeah.
and not just the oboe player or
Yeah.
the violist or whatever part
Right.
that's there. And I think we all have major parts.
Yep.
So, when you see me, when you hear from me in whatever setting, for example, this setting today, you're getting to see and hear. You're getting to see because we're on a video connection here too. But the audience here is getting to just hear us.
Right.
But they're getting to hear my teaching part, my what other parts are here? What do you see, Tammy?
Well,
what
I
parts are you
definitely,
seeing
well,
or hearing?
I'm always willing to tell people what I think. So, um, well, I see the therapist, I see the philosopher, I see the thinker, and I mean the thinker, I mean not just the thinker, but the deeper sort of spiritual person.
Mm, mhm,
Then there's something I see I can't even put a word to. It's a
mm.
good thing though. I mean it that nicely. Like, that could have come
Well,
out all wrong, right?
yeah, and all your listeners are now wondering what you see, right?
I know, really.
Yeah,
Well, they if they really want to see it, they can send me a note and ask me for the video if they want to watch the video.
sure.
Um, but no,
Well, and
I mean, then there's the author, right? There's the
yeah,
writer, there's the organizer of ideas and concepts, and the way that you've woven these ideas and built them into levels and layers that are very, very accessible. And I
mm,
love the way we're taking your book and applying it not just to leadership, but to the individual case of an individual making a transition and being that maestro or that leader in their own lives. I'm really appreciating that. And I have to tell you, I was sitting here and I'm thinking of a list of people that I'm going to send your book to now,
ah,
who I think will really, really enjoy it, because I'm really loving the way that you have conceptualized and contextualized a lot of these ideas.
well, let me give you one more reason, as though I need to actually pull the trigger on getting some books sent
I
out
think
to
I
them.
think I know what you're going to say.
Every book that you buy is going to equally provide a book to an emerging leader around the world. All of my profits are going to an organization, a UK charity that's affiliated with the United Nations, called WYSE, WYSE, World Youth Service and Enterprise. And they bring together multiple times a year smaller groups of, let's say, groups of 20 to 30 young people. These are people in their 20s. Most of them are from emerging countries, emerging market countries. And they work with them around some fundamentals of leadership. So some of these young people might be identified as potential leaders in their colleges or universities or in their community or in their work, whatever it is, there's some reason why they're identified. And I have found out about this organization several years ago, was involved some with the organization. I was a faculty member for one of their programs in Switzerland a number of years ago. And I want to make sure that these young people have a practical tool to help guide them and sort of a map and compass as they navigate the world of leading. And so I'm giving all my profits to that organization. And every book you buy will make it possible for another book to be given to those young people.
Well, I was hoping you would bring that up, and if you didn't, I was going to bring it up. But definitely, you can count on me to probably support at least a few more young people that way. I love that. That really does. It does. I just get the feeling, David, that you walk your talk, and it's so much more than talk.
Mhm.
And I want to thank you for being here today. This has
You're
been
so
great.
welcome.
And I think you've left us with a lot a lot to peel away, a lot to think about in terms of those of us out there who are thinking about making a transition or maybe weren't even thinking. Because I know I have listeners out there who just enjoy listening to the various guests. And I would bet that some of them might be sparked today in ways they never imagined possible.
Well, I would certainly hope that what we've talked about today will give your listeners some traction in their own transitions, and some ways that they can begin to think about their own direction and what they want to take on there. And even some of your listeners who might be looking at the transition that comes getting out of careers and moving
absolutely.
into retirement.
Yes.
That's a key piece, because I've navigated that terrain recently myself. And you can see how much I'm retired, because here I am promoting a book and I working with some clients on the phones, but at least I'm not getting on a plane right now and going regularly to work with active clients. So
right.
Yeah, my own retirement has been something to navigate.
Right. Yeah. And I think you've defined retirement in a way that not everybody else defines retirement.
Sure.
Sure. So if people do want to get in touch with you, even though you're somewhat retired, but not really, how can they find you?
Well, the best and most direct way is to go to my website, and that is insideoutleaders.net.
Okay.
And I expect you'll have that in show notes available.
Everything, your book, everything's going to be in the show notes.
Oh, cool. Wonderful.
Absolutely. We'll have a link to Wise. We'll have a link to your book, everything. I also want to just close this out by giving a special shout out to our friend and colleague, Michael O'Brien, because he introduced us, and I'm just tickled to be introduced to someone like you through someone like him. So thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Michael. And I don't know that I've said this before, but Michael was an inspiration to me for me giving my profits to Wise, because Michael donates the profits from his work to World Bicycle Relief.
Yes. Oh, okay.
And so Michael was seminal in getting my juices flowing around. I want to go to work for this organization. I want to sell books so that young people can do this.
Okay.
So
see, and I was sitting here talking to you because Michael said that you have been one of the biggest inspirations to him. So there you go.
Well, when we unleash, I think this is a good example, and Michael's story and mine and our relationship is a great example of how when we let ourselves really go for why we're here and have a sense of our own purpose, it unleashes so many cool things.
Oh,
and you have no idea what it'll unleash.
I just got goosebumps when you said that. Well, I hate to say so long for now, but I'm going to. So, David, thank you again. Please, everybody, check out the show notes. Check out David's book. There's so much more here than what we were able to talk about today. But thank you again. I really appreciate you being here.
You're so welcome. It's been a delight.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with David Kolb. It was such a pleasure to speak with him and learn about his personal and professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? Is there something you'll put into action this week that you'll benefit from for years to come? Share what resonated with you in the show notes at workfromtheinsideout.com. Look for episode 021. That's also where you'll find all the links and resources from today's podcast. If you enjoyed this episode with David, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find my page at tammygoolerloeb.com/Apple. Thanks for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase fulfillment and satisfaction in your work or other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. And who knows? Maybe you'll be a guest on this podcast. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.